And now the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a daily exploration into how philosophy, psychology, and technology shape how we think, feel, and live.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. There is a kind of violence in our cultural preference for clarity, not the visible kind that startles or scars, but the quiet violence of smoothing over, of removing edges, of sealing what should remain open. We prize coherence so deeply that contradiction has come to feel like a threat. But what if it's the opposite? What if contradiction paradox is the one reliable sign that something real is present, a self, a memory, a system, a belief? What if the absence of paradox is not clarity, but erasure? In this frame, the world appears differently. Stories that seem polished begin to feel suspect. Systems that offer seamless logic begin to reveal the cost of their internal tidiness. And in turn, the role of interpretation shifts, from the search for resolution to the stewardship of tension. To hold paradox is to live with a form of truth that does not conclude, but insists it cannot be finished, only born. This orientation matters now more than ever. As institutions, technologies, and narratives are streamlined into digestibility, the appetite for contradiction is being quietly trained out of us. But a culture that cannot host paradox is one that cannot understand itself. It becomes brittle, repetitive, and oversure. In the name of resolution, it loses access to revelation. This is not a call for confusion. It is a defense of depth. Paradox is not the enemy of meaning, it is its condition. And to resist the structures that would control or eliminate it is not only an aesthetic choice, it is a philosophical stance, perhaps even a moral one. The machinery behind paradox control is rarely visible. It does not announce itself with censorship or decrees. It moves through more acceptable channels: algorithms, audience testing, brand alignment, reputational risk. These are the soft mechanisms of cultural engineering, not designed to confront but to soothe. And because they present as neutral, efficient, data-driven, user-friendly, they are difficult to resist. Paradox becomes a problem to be fixed, an inconsistency to be explained away, rather than a site of generative tension. This logic has spread beyond storytelling. It has entered language, politics, psychology. We are offered identities that resolve cleanly, histories that arc toward closure, relationships that must make sense in linear time. The systems we build reward resolution over ambiguity. In education, we test for correct answers rather than conflicting interpretations. In therapy, we seek clean diagnoses over layered histories. In governance, we legislate as if problems can be solved without contradiction. Yet the unresolved remains, not as residue, but as truth. When we eliminate paradox, we do not make things more honest. We make them less demanding. The complexity is still there. It has simply been pushed out of sight. It moves to the margins or into silence. This is not healing. It is narrative anesthesia. And it fosters a culture less capable of recognizing its own depth. In this way, paradox control is not only epistemological, it is effective. It reshapes what we are willing to feel or even name. And with each simplification, our tolerance for difficulty thins. But paradox is not just a complication, it is a capacity. The ability to stay with two truths at once, to bear contradiction without panic, is not a flaw in human reasoning. It is one of its highest functions. To hold complexity is to honor the real, and in doing so we make space for what lies beyond immediate comprehension: the moral, the intimate, the sacred. These are not things we resolve, they are things we endure, question, and carry. To live without paradox is to live in denial of proportion. Every meaningful life, every friendship, faith, grief, or calling is composed of competing currents that never fully reconcile. We know this in private, even if we deny it in public. We forgive someone who has hurt us while still feeling the wound. We believe in justice and yet watch it fail. We love people we cannot fully understand. This is the texture of existence, not its failure. And when our systems no longer allow this texture to surface, when they demand neatness where life offers only thrum, we begin to drift from what is most recognizably human. The consequence is a cultural thinning, not a collapse, but a loss of weight. Ideas become safer, stories become smoother, selves become more curated. In place of contradiction, we are offered irony. In place of insight, opinion. Platforms reward those who choose a side, flatten a conflict, or abandon the complexity altogether. And so we become fluent in performance but stammer at sincerity. The paradoxes are still there, pressing at the seams, but the seams themselves are weaker. There is a danger in making all meaning conditional on resolution. It teaches us that unless something fits, it has no value, that unless it can be named, it isn't real. This is a deep impoverishment. The richest parts of experience, grace, doubt, forgiveness, ambivalence, do not announce themselves in bold lines. They flicker, they contradict, they change. And so to cultivate a culture that can host these things, we must resist the pressure to explain them away. We might think of this not just as an intellectual act, but a form of hospitality, a kind of quiet reverence for what does not cohere. To live well in this sense is not to fix the contradictions, but to become a home for them. Not to collapse uncertainty, but to make room within it. This is not passivity, it is fidelity, a commitment to what remains difficult, enduring, and alive. The systems that most urgently require paradox are often the ones most resistant to it. Political ideologies, religious orthodoxies, and corporate narratives each function by drawing lines between right and wrong, sacred and profane, mission and threat. But these lines, though rhetorically clean, are ontologically brittle. The world does not obey them. History is full of holy hypocrisies, revolutions that betray their ideals, and companies that champion ethics while eroding them. The paradox is not incidental, it is constitutive, and to ignore it is not to escape contradiction, but to become governed by it blindly. This is why paradox control is not merely a cultural concern, it is a civic one. A democracy that cannot bear contradiction becomes performative. It allows participation, but only within the bounds of acceptable simplicity. Dissent becomes disloyalty. Complexity becomes obstruction, and what begins as a narrowing of narrative eventually becomes a narrowing of possibility. In such an environment, even well-intentioned efforts to get to the truth risk collapsing under the weight of what they cannot admit. The language of resolution is seductive. It promises relief, certainty, direction, but the deepest social questions of justice, equality, memory, repair do not yield to resolution. They require dwelling, they require tension. They require us to stand in spaces where clear answers cannot yet be found and perhaps never will be. And the ability to remain in such spaces together may be the closest thing we have to collective maturity. This is not a call to reject clarity. It is a call to expand our capacity for what clarity excludes, to stop mistaking narrative smoothness for moral seriousness, to stop confusing resolution with repair. What needs cultivating is not better messaging, but better muscles for contradiction, for sitting with competing truths without needing one to win. Because in many of the places that matter most, truth is not something we land on, it is something we learn to hold. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. This episode was digitally narrated by Holly, who helps bring our ideas to life. And thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. They help us reach more people like you.